Hi, my name is Heidi Dauphin. I'm an artist that lives in Phoenix, and I'm here to talk to you today about a little bit about my career, about this piece. It's called Great Grandma's Crazy Quilt Transformed, that is in the 20th anniversary Breakfast Club show at the Scottsdale Civic Center Library, October through December. And then I'm going to show you my process, how I made this, and translate that into a project that you can do at home with some simple supplies that you probably have at your house. So a little bit about me is that I'm a public artist. That's how I make a little bit of money being an artist. And this is my most recent public art piece called Solterra Suns. It's made out of handmade ceramic tile. That's mostly my background, is ceramic and sculpture. And this is in the city of Avondale. It's at Bridgewater Assisted Living on Van Buren Road out in Avondale. And this took me about a year to do. It's 2 panels of these suns with cutouts in them. I designed the whole thing, and I work with a metal fabricator to make frames, but then I make all the handmade tile. I cut it out, and then I design the glazing and the color format and fire them and set them, and then I have the metal fabricator install the giant panels. But anyways, that's a little bit of what I do when I'm not making things in my studio, like a paper quilt. And so the paper quilt kind of represents a little bit more of my studio practice. I just wanted to add that the image in Solterra Suns was inspired by a quilt design called Mariner's Compass, and here you can see a little bit of the influence. So I use quilts for an inspiration for a lot of my designs. So the Breakfast Club is a club with, I think, over 100 members that was formed 20 years ago by Beth Ames Schwartz, and she's our fearless leader who plans activities for us. Before COVID, monthly, we would do all kinds of things, learn all kinds of stuff. We went to some great shows, and we got to see the curator explain to us how she chose the show. And then sometimes we meet for breakfast or lunch or dinner after our event, and it's just a great connection to build with other artists. And I've been involved in it for 5 years, and it's just been a really nice just a nice way to connect with other artists and meet other artists and learn a lot. So it's been really helpful to me. So at the Civic Center Library in Scottsdale, for 3 months, there will be a 20th anniversary show, which I think about 40 artists from the Breakfast Club are featured. So the piece that was selected for me was this, and this is, I said before, it's called Great Grandma's Crazy Quilt Transformed. And right now I'm just gonna start here, and then I'll move to where the actual quilt is. So it's inspired by my great grandma's quilt, and it is in progress. This is only 9 squares, and it will eventually be 25 squares, but this was the biggest width that the show would allow. And so I was inspired by her quilt just by, I've looked at it for many years. It's been hanging in my house probably for 30 years. And I also am a ceramic artist, and I wanted to make something light. And so it is made out of paper, and it is my lists. I have a collection of lists that I've been saving for 20 years. And so these are my scraps of my life that I have used to create my paper crazy quilt that is inspired by my great grandma's crazy quilt. Okay, so I'm in my tight little hallway, but this is where the original quilt hangs. So this quilt was my great grandma made it around 1900. Her initials are here, and I know that she was my grandpa's mother, and the initials are Sarah Alice Yeager, but Yeager was her maiden name. And so my grandpa was born in 1907, I think, and he had an older sister. And so I'm just placing this around 1900. And my grandma gave it to me, and it's just always hung in our house, and I love it. I've come to appreciate it greatly by working with it and all the pieces. But this is a traditional crazy quilt. That means that it's not a specific pattern, and that it's made from the pieces and remnants of other things. And so I kind of, as I've been working on my paper quilt, these are the remnants of clothing or blankets from long ago, and my lists are remnants from my life and things that I've done. It's just a transformation of what a crazy quilt can be. So this is the whole quilt, 5 by 5. I don't think you can see all of it, but I have worked with these 9 squares right now for the Breakfast Club show. So here we are back at my paper quilt, and I just wanted to zoom in and show you one square and just show you that I've been piecing my paper pieces together with a sewing machine and using a zigzag stitch. And then when I put the squares together, I have attempted to hand embroider just the seams for the squares. So the pieces in the individual squares are sewn together on a sewing machine with a zigzag stitch, and the squares are hand embroidered. Here is the same square on the crazy quilt that my grandma made, great grandma, and you can see if I zoom in again, I know she stitched the fabric together first, but then she has actually hand embroidered over every seam and then made these little picture scenes in some of the squares. But I just wanted to give a detailed look at some of this embroidering that I am so appreciative and amazed of. It takes me about an hour and a half to 2 hours to do one 12-inch seam with the paper. Now I do think it is easier to embroider on cloth than paper, but anyways, hopefully you can appreciate some of this. I've grown to appreciate it greatly. Here's a shot of both my paper quilt and my great grandma's fabric quilt side by side, so you can see the comparison. In my quilt, I wanted to say that some of the lists are my daughter's writing when she was really small. She's now 17. And so I have like little kid writing, and I have like writing that she just did with schedules of her classes her senior year. And my mom's writing is also in it. I haven't found my grandma's writing, but I'm looking for something with that because my grandma is the one that gave me my great grandma's quilt. And then my mom taught me how to sew, and I'm actually sewing a lot of these pieces when I use the machine on the sewing machine that my mom gave me that she sewed my baby clothes on. It's over 50 years old. And then my daughter's writing is in it too. So it represents 5 generations of women, and I love the connection that that makes. So here we are in my studio, and I've hung the 9 squares of the quilt next to the other 6 that I've already done. So in the next part of this video, I'm going to show you exactly how do I make this. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to show you a beginner, intermediate, and advanced level of something you can do at home with your own found materials. So here I am at the quilt in my hallway again, and I'm just showing you the first step of what I do, which is tracing the quilt pattern. And this is like 4 mil plastic that I buy in the 100 feet rolls because I use it for public art pieces when I'm tracing out my ceramic designs. You could use any kind of plastic drop cloth that's kind of thick if you want to trace something around your house. I'm going to show you other options, but I just wanted you to see. So I'm starting to trace the 4th row of the quilt, and I start by outlining the squares. And sometimes it's hard to tell where one square stops and starts because of this crazy quilt pattern that is here. So I use the ruler where there are longer straight lines, and then a lot of them I actually, well, like even this one, when I start to go into the design, that one's a pretty straight line, but then this starts to be a curve, and I just trace, and sometimes this gets a little dark, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. But if you have something around your house that you would like to trace, a pattern on a blanket, any kind of design, you could put some kind of plastic over it. And I'm using a Sharpie marker. Just make sure that your plastic covers your object and that the marker that you're using won't go through and ruin what you've done. But I've done 3 rows like this. So I'll continue doing this, and then I'll show you the next step and show you how you can do this with quilt patterns found on the internet too. Okay, I finished tracing the whole row, And for this row, I'm gonna start and use this square down here, number 20, as my example that I'm gonna show you how to do. So here are a few quilt patterns I printed out from the internet. If you don't want to trace something in your house and go the more traditional route, you could Google quilt patterns, quilt pattern coloring pages, and then go to the image section. This one is called an 8-pointed star, and that's the way it printed out. I enlarged it to 175% of my printer, and I got a size I wanted to work with. This is a crazy quilt pattern, but you know, you could draw your own crazy quilt pattern. Just decide this size of square you want to work with. This is the simplest, most basic quilt pattern, a 9 square. You can do all kinds of variations on it, but for little kids, you could start with this and play with color of the different squares. And then I'm going to show you this one. This is called Rising Star, and that's the page I printed it out on, and then I enlarged it 175%, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Sorry for my archaic video skills. And then I just wanted to show you that when you play with traditional quilt patterns, look what can happen. Like there's variations and they can get more complicated. Or once you do 2 of these next to each other, or 4 for a grid, you're going to get new patterns coming out. So search for what you want. Are you tracing something around your house? Are you getting something off the internet? Find the pattern you want. That's the first step in creating anything. What's your design? So once you've decided your design, I'm going to simultaneously show you how to make the Rising Star quilt pattern that I found on the internet, and then my square in my 4th row for my quilt pattern. I'm going to use my list of paper for my quilt. Here's a list of supplies I made. Pause the video if you want to look at them longer. I divided it into 3 parts. The beginner, we need all those supplies for everyone, and then intermediate is if you sew, and advanced is if you embroider. This is what I'm going to use. This is a pile of stuff I just found I'm going to use for the Rising Star quilt. I've got some centers of envelopes that bills were in, and they have interesting patterns. I've got some blue magazine pages, so my theme is going to be blue, and then this is actually Kleenex boxes. And look at that cool pattern. And then over here is my 2 boxes spread out of lists that I've collected for 20 years. So I'm an artist, but I'm a collector. And so I forage through these and I find what I need. And then this pile down here is what I've already used, but I go back and use it some more. And then this map was lying here, and maps are a really good thing to cut up. So be creative about what you're going to cut up and where you're going to find your colors or your patterns that you might use. Okay, so I'm going to work on both of these patterns, and the first thing you need to do is number your pieces. With my crazy quilt, I number every piece. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because every piece is different on the crazy quilt. But on the traditional Rising Star quilt, there's really only 1, 2, 3, 4 shapes here. There's a square, a large square, and 2 different size triangles. And this is a really good exercise for little kids too, if you want to focus on just different shapes. So I'm going to number what I need to trace. I need squares, small triangles, and large squares. So that's just 4 things I need to trace there. And so for this one, I use my plastic again. And for this one, I'm going to use paper. So I just taped my plastic and my paper over with blue painter's tape. If I haven't said enough, blue painter's tape is really nice for this kind of project. So I'm just going to use the ruler for this one because it is all straight lines. And like I said, I only need, I'm tracing patterns that I will cut out. And so I need the little square, which is right here. And I need, whoops, hold your ruler straight. I need this triangle. Sometimes when you're tracing, your ruler can get in your shadows. And if you make those little hash marks, you can know exactly where to put the ruler rather than the shadow of the line. And then I need the big square. And so I'll finish tracing that. And then I will cut out these pieces. But I did label them. So before I cut them apart, I'm going to do that again. That was 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do the same thing on this piece, and I'm just going to do it with plastic, but I'll show you the pieces after I've cut them up and what I'm going to do with them. So I finished tracing this one on plastic and I untaped it. So I have 2 copies, and then I untaped this one. If you have trouble seeing through this on a table, you can always use a window. You can always trace over the lines from the printed version with a Sharpie marker. But what you're going to need to do is cut out your pieces so that you have these tracing patterns. And then I'm going to show you how to just glue onto the paper that you printed out. If you want multiple copies, if you're going to do more than this, you would want to make multiple copies beforehand. But now I have my center square. I have this little piece. If you want to write down how many times you need this square, I need the little square 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So I need to remember that. And then I need the large triangle 4 times also. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not on my patterns, but for my design. My little triangle I need a lot of. I think 8. So I'm just going to use these pattern pieces, and it's kind of nice for a more traditional quilt that not every piece is a different size. So I'm going to take these pieces, and I'm going to think a little bit about this, but do I want the large triangles to be out of the envelope paper, and maybe the little triangles out of the blues that I got out of magazine pictures? So I would need 8 of these, so maybe I'll cut 2 out of this color and 2 out of this color. And then this, do I want blues? I need something else. Oh, but I wanted to use this for the big square. So I think I might cut that out of there. This is a little bit harder cardstock. So I will do a little bit of this and check back, but then I'm also going to cut these apart, my plastic patterns. But the way I trace these is I just hold them down. If you don't want to hold them down, you could tape them. Again, with the blue painter's tape, it comes off really nicely. You can use Scotch tape, but sometimes it rips your paper a little bit. But see, I just held that and I've got 1 square. I need, if I wanted all of these the same, I need 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 of pattern 3. So I'm gonna just go with that and continue to do this, and then I'll check back and show you what I'm doing. Okay, hi again. A lot has happened since I left you. So I cut out most of the squares for the paper traditional quilt, and I just wanted to review that I took 4 of pattern 3 and put it right here. I did cut out the large blue square out of the Kleenex box, and that is my center of my design. And then I took 2 different magazine things for I had 8 squares of this, or 8 little tiny triangles, and I used these like boat layouts and then sky. And if you are tracing one piece 8 times, it did get a little flimsy at the end. You might need to make another pattern piece out of that. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do with these squares? And I think that I should add some lists, some handwritten lists to, even though it's not my part of my great-grandmother's quilt. But I was looking around and looking at some lists that I found that had my handwriting that was blue ink. And so I think I will take these and maybe cut a couple squares out. And so you saw me do this tracing with the blue triangles, but I just thought I'd show you a little bit of list tracing. And the thing I like, so I would then cut that out. And I'm going to use 4 little handwritten blue lists for that. And the thing I like about the writing is just there's so little handwriting still. And this one has my little doodles. And so I think I definitely want to get that. And I would just trace this and then cut it out. But when I look through this handwriting, back to my great-grandmother's quilt, she used remnants of fabric that were things that she had made in her lifetime. And these lists are just remnants of my life. And I guess handwriting, like I have different people's handwriting in this, but it tells a story too. And it's a remnant of the past. And it's just kind of interesting. So, and then I could play with how I put it down. But I'll look at that. So these aren't just laid out. I just wanted you to see that I kind of play around with stuff and lay it out. I'll get back to that one, but I wanted to show you what I did with this one. I kind of went through my bins of lists, and I started to look at color and just how the wording went. And so when I left you last, I hadn't cut my plastic pieces apart. So I have a separate plastic piece for every pattern. And then my original is underneath here. So for this one, I kind of have to think about where some of these pieces are quite large, and it's hard to find a list that big or writing that big. This piece of paper is actually notes from a folder from my old job in Boston. And so with this one, just like the repeated little triangles and squares, I would hold this down and I would trace around it. The thing I like about the plastic that I use is that I can see the writing that I'm gonna get, because my shapes are so strange and weird shapes that it's hard to kind of understand the writing, like if I was using paper patterns. So if you have access to plastic for a pattern, it does last longer. It's a little squiggly, like to hold it down and trace it. Some of the corners aren't as nice as like a harder piece of paper. But I think hopefully you can see that I traced that shape. So the plastic lets you see what you're tracing. And then I'm gonna go ahead and do that with all of my pieces right here. And I would be cutting this out and laying it out. And I usually get the whole thing laid out before I start to put it together, but sometimes you can just work on one section. So I'm gonna finish cutting out and laying out, and then I'll check back with you about gluing and sewing. Okay, hopefully you're looking at 2 laid out pieces. I started to glue the side of this one, and as you can see, I've used my friend the blue tape again, because when these pieces are so strange and odd shapes, I tend to use the blue tape as I'm laying out. But right here, I finished cutting all my squares and I started gluing, and I was just gonna show you a little demo of that with the glue stick. And I'm just kind of going around the outside corner. I love the purple glue sticks because, well, I can see on the paper where it is and where I don't want to stick my triangle again. And I'm saving that big centerpiece for the last and hoping that it all fits together. But there, I stuck that down. You can see sometimes things don't work out exactly, and I'm hoping that the next piece will kind of overlap that. And you just go along. So this would be the beginner version. No sewing involved, just cutting from a pattern and then glue sticking it on. You can use Elmer's. The only problem with Elmer's is that it's going to get a little wrinkly. So a glue stick might be the easiest. But whatever you have will work. And then sometimes the glue stick's a little easier to just kind of hold and wiggle your piece into place. So I'll just finish up this row on camera. And move those other pieces out of the way. And press that all down. So that is how I would finish that piece. Now moving on to this one and sewing. Part of why I started this project is because I love sewing paper. It's just, there's something fun about it. but it's kind of the last step. So I'm gonna untape a few pieces. I decided which seam I was gonna show for the video first, but you can see I kind of have this whole thing stuck together. I'm gonna take this middle section out, and actually even maybe just these two. So it's kind of intricate the way I put this all together. The one thing I do want to say, I don't know if you'll see it on camera, but I actually cut about 1/8 of an inch bigger on most of my pieces when I'm using the sewing, just so that I can have a little wiggle room. I've got some red thread in here. I like bright colors so that my stitching shows up. It's not my fancy great grandma's embroidery. I've got it on the widest zigzag stitch I can do. And I just use my blue tape instead of needles. Because if I were to pin the paper together, those holes stay. And so I just try to make a nice tight stitch. I've been sewing, this machine is really old. This is the machine that my mom made my baby clothes on. It's over 50 years old. But it works well. And I've broken a few needles. The paper is so thin, it doesn't really matter. But I guess if you were sewing fabric and paper back and forth, I might change the needle that I'm using. I'm not sure. I haven't researched what it does. And then when I get to there, it's like taking out a needle when you're sewing. And then, and I don't know if you can see, my paper is a little overlapped there, but that just gives me some room. And then I back stitch, and if you want to zoom out, I have this nice colorful stitch. And so then I have the first two pieces, 5 and 4, sewn together, and then I kind of lay it back out, tape it together, figure out what my next seam is, and go from there. So I'll finish these two pieces up and let you see the end results. Okay, here are the finished versions of the two squares we did for this workshop today. Over here we have the glued paper square, and I put it on blue paper. I just cut it out and laid it there. But isn't that nice how it pops? So that square was made out of some lists that I wrote, some blue magazine colored paper, some inside of envelopes, and a Kleenex box as the center. Now, wouldn't that be cool? I challenge you to make 4 or 9 of those and then put all those blocks together and then possibly stitch or glue the edges of that. And I just wanted to show you on this one, I finished stitching everything. I try to use a different color thread for each seam, and that kind of pays homage to the Crazy Quilt. I'm not using a different embroidery stitch, but I'm using a different color thread. It's a little bit of a pain to rethread my machine all the time, but that's square number 20. It'll be on the bottom of the 9 that are in the show. And so this would be the beginner version with glue and cut paper and different kinds of patterns. And then the intermediate version, sewing and stitching those pieces together on a machine. And then if you are feeling really advanced, I challenge you to get your thread and embroidery floss and experiment with hand stitching your squares together and coming up with different seams. I am not an embroidery expert, so I challenge you to go on YouTube and look for some different stitches and try it out. What I do want to say is if you're going to attempt to embroider on paper, I glued a piece of fabric to this seam with something called Wonder Under. It is something you iron on, and you can fuse paper and fabric or 2 pieces of fabric together, and that might help out a little bit with that advanced technique. So in conclusion, I hope that I could spark your creativity today and that you're inspired to maybe make a clutter quilt of your own with things that you found around your house and maybe some of your own handwriting or someone's handwriting that's special to you. Again, this was our little square that we worked with. I just wanted to remind you that that could be an easy version, but don't forget about this 9-point square that could be the most simplest solution for very young kids. And then also you don't have to stop with one square. You could keep going and make things a little more complicated if you wanted to. So hopefully I cater to some different levels of creativity. And just a reminder, this will be hanging at the Scottsdale Civic Center Library for the Artist Breakfast Club show, along with I think 40 other works, from October 5th through December 31st. Please come see it. Wear a mask. I think they have shortened hours, so check the website for hours. And if you'd like to see more of my work, you can look at me up at HeidiDauphin.com, or on Instagram. I'm kind of talked about this piece in progress, so you can look at it and then you'll see some future stuff happening too. And that's at HeidiDauphin.com, HeidiDauphin. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you get to the library to see the show.